In 1955, a man from a small village in Kerala swam onto the shores of Abu Dhabi. He told no one at home where he was going. Before his trip there, he had tried to set up a business in his village. Failing that, he tried again in Bombay. Failing that, he decided to pay 500 rupees for a passage on a crowded launch, a journey that would have been at least 8 days long with little food or water. At the end of the journey, when the launch could go no further, its passengers were dropped off in the shallow waters around Abu Dhabi, leaving them to finish the trip on their own. After his brief swim to the shore, at a nearby marketplace, he found other Malayalis who, as he later recalls, approached him with offers of food and shelter when they recognized a fellow Malayali. This man's name was Kunyakutti Haji. He narrated his story to Prema Kurian, a sociologist who was documenting his and other early migrant stories during fieldwork in the Malappuram district in Kerala in the late 1980s. When he left in the 1950s, Kunyakutti had left behind a village that had been incredibly poor. Through her research, Kurian describes an area overgrown with scrub and populated by wolves. Her interviewees from the village, like this elderly man named Muhammad Ali Haji, also painted a pretty sad picture. Kacha houses with thatched roofs, families who could afford just one meal with rice every day, and only about 10 houses out of 50 with smoke rising from the chimneys. But 70 years later, Malappuram looks very different. Concrete houses, two-storied with tiled roofs, gold shops, travel agencies, and department stores in what used to be a rural market. Virtually no visible signs of poverty. And a lot of this transformation is thanks to the descendants of that first migration event. Nearly 2 million Keralites across the Gulf sent home crores of rupees. For example, in 2023, they sent more than 200,000 crore rupees or more than $23 billion as remittance. That sum is exactly as huge as it sounds. It accounts for nearly a quarter of Kerala's entire economy. So, when the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran on February 28th, it didn't feel like a distant event for Kerala. As Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz and launched its retaliatory attacks on US bases in the Gulf, the whole area was plunged into war. And with it, the millions of migrants staying there. Now, I don't know if you know, but India happens to be the largest recipient of remittances in the world. They account for more than 3% of the country's entire GDP, which is actually higher than the share of exports to the US, and that stands at 2%. See, there are about 9 million Indians based in the Gulf countries, and they contribute to nearly 38% of the country's total remittance inflows, and that amounts to about $51 billion. Economists have already started flagging that the continued conflict will most likely dent the remittance flows enough to impact the economy. But while the impact would be hard on India, for Kerala, where the remittance makes up more than 20% of the state's net state domestic product or NSDP, the hurt would be impossible to ignore. Welcome to Daybreak, a business podcast from The Ken. I'm your host Rachel Verghese, and every day of the week, my co-host Nita Sharma and I will bring you one news story that is worth understanding and worth your time. Today is Wednesday, the 18th of March. So, what does more than 20% of a state's NSDP actually look like? Now, that's the number last documented by the Kerala Migration Survey of 2023. And on ground, it materializes in a lot of different ways. First, real estate. Towns across the state are peppered with huge villas, some even spanning 3,000 square feet. They're all made by people who were making sofas or working at restaurants in the Middle East, saving half of their monthly wages over decades and then sending it back home. Locals say that this kind of a phenomenon actually triggers a kind of rivalry, where migrants silently compete amongst themselves to have the biggest house in the neighborhood. Middle East Eye reports that in 2018, Nearly $4 billion out of the 12 billion sent in total remittances was spent on construction alone. Other than real estate, a lot of remittance spending, according to the KMS 2023, goes into debt repayment, education, and savings. About 14% of remittances is allocated to loan repayment and 10% for education. In fact, a study found that remittance receiving households showed an increased demand for English medium and private education, especially when state education began reducing in quality. The probability of children enrolling in private schools actually increases by nearly 45% when they come from remittance receiving families. Studies have highlighted that even though remittances are received at the household level and not the state, they indirectly contribute to the economy and support public finances. Increased household disposable income leads to higher savings, reducing reliance on government sponsored welfare programs and lowers state level public borrowing requirements. Also, increased consumption from remittance inflows contribute to greater tax revenues, which reduces the state's dependence on debt financed expenditures. In fact, an editorial piece from the Center for Public Policy Research stated that in the 1990s, the supermarkets and malls that started popping up in Kerala were owed to beneficiary investments from remittances. Even a lack of investment options in the late 90s and early 2000s resulted in family members of migrant workers setting up small and medium enterprises, eateries, and clothing stores in the state. Ronnie Thomas Rajan, a professor at the Department of Economics at the University of Kerala, said that Kozhikode, another major town in Kerala, saw massive development owing to the migration process. In the 50 years since migration properly began, the city's road network has increased in size by nearly 10 times, the number of hospitals by 3 times, and factories by 7. All of this is now at stake. And Kerala hasn't bothered with mincing its words with regards to this crisis. Early in March, Pinarayi Vijayan, the Kerala chief minister, called the US and Israel rogue nations who are worsening the crisis through their reckless actions. It wasn't just your everyday statement of political dissent. Like I mentioned earlier, for Kerala, the war might as well be at its doorstep. As Vijayan said, and I'm quoting here, the state's concern is that lakhs of our brothers and sisters are living in the Gulf countries, and today they find themselves in a deeply insecure situation. Now, deeply insecure is still perhaps a bit of an understatement. Stay tuned. But before we go further, my co host Snigdha Sharma has something to tell you.
Okay, quick break, and this one is relevant if you are a data person. You are listening to Daybreak, which means that you already know what we at the Can do. Deeply reported business journalism for people who want the complete picture. The Ken is hiring an analytics lead, and this is not a build reports for the quarterly review kind of a role. You would be the person that every team comes to, editorial, product, business, when they need to know what's actually working. You'd be shaping what stories get told, what products get built, and where the company bets its energy next. It is a Bangalore based full time job, and honestly, this is the kind of role that does not come around too often. The link is in the show notes. And now, back to Rachel.
Indian migrants in the Gulf are already facing difficulties with their employment. A CNBC report mentioned that experts stated that Indian workers in the Gulf are mostly working in oil services, construction, hospitality, and retail sectors. All of these are industries that are particularly vulnerable to the disruption caused by Iranian attacks. Al Jazeera reported that several oil and gas firms have already shut operations amid the Iranian attacks. In some parts of the Gulf and beyond, there are cases of delayed wages in construction and hospitality. Some analysts even fear hiring freezes for newer immigrant workers. Of course, workers worry that if the situation continues, they are more than likely to lose their jobs. Even several blue collar workers and professionals across the Gulf are reportedly fearing potentially losing jobs if the war escalates further. A source who works in the health sector based in Qatar also told the Ken that several European and American multinational companies have given their workers work from home options so that they can return to their home countries and work from there until the situation stabilizes. The same source also claimed that restrictions on Ramadan gatherings and celebrations have hit the hotel industry severely. In fact, they'd even hire skilled workers from Kerala just to cook evening snacks at scale. These workers would travel in for a month while being paid incredibly competitive daily wages, sometimes even 1000 riyals, which is about 25,000 rupees. And then they go back home and spend their earnings on renovations or other major expenses. None of that happened this year. For contract employees, of course, their jobs are contingent on whether the situation stabilizes or not. And obviously, companies would not be willing to support employees working from home indefinitely. And if the crisis continues, these employees worry that they will most certainly be let go. Also, it's not so easy to return to home countries. Reports say that more than 15,000 flights were cancelled or grounded in just the first week since the crisis began, across Middle Eastern airspaces alone. Speaking of leaving a war zone, there's another problem that migrant workers have to untangle. Open Magazine reported early just this week that workers who work under the kafala system, in which their legal status is tied to their employer, cannot leave the country without their employer's permission. But there's also a question of what exactly they'd be coming back to. See, this particular situation, with the potential loss of remittances and a sudden influx of unemployed people returning to their home state, isn't a first time for Kerala. In 1990, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, the instability reverberated across the Middle East. Several migrants had their salaries cut, and newspapers in Kerala reported that remittances from the Gulf had gone up by several times as migrants hurriedly tried to send back their savings. Prema Kurian, the sociologist I mentioned earlier, corroborated this incident with banks in the region in the same year. She also spoke of a big drop in spending by Gulf families. This affected businesses all over Kerala, but most noticeably in the pockets with the most migration. Kurian happened to be carrying out her study on the sociological effects of migration in a village in Malappuram at the same time as people were returning. And here's her account of what she witnessed. Families who had most of their money in Kuwaiti banks lost their life savings. In any case, the value of the Kuwaiti dinar had fallen sharply in the wake of the invasion, so their bank accounts had become practically worthless. In some cases, families had not saved much because they were counting on obtaining a gratuity payment when they retired. Many had debts, others only had a big house and some land. Several had daughters to marry off with large dowries and children who were studying in expensive boarding schools in India. I heard of the case of one man who tried to commit suicide after returning from Kuwait because he had 3 unmarried daughters and a lot of debts. The part where remittances went up is especially interesting because the same thing has been happening over the last couple weeks in 2026. Policy Circle reported this week that banks and remittance firms noted a spike in transfers over recent weeks. Their estimates suggest that inflows from the Middle East region in March were 20 to 30% above normal. So, the anxiety is real. And while the Kuwait crisis stabilized in a year, with migrants returning to the UAE by 1991, this time the situation looks different. That conflict was largely limited to a smaller region. This time, all of the Gulf is a theater of war, which means migrants have nowhere to go but back. Add to this the frailty of Kerala's infrastructure. A great example of this was the mass return during COVID. Unemployment spiked by 3% because the state had no jobs for the returning population. A survey conducted in 2022 found that more than 70% of returnees remained unemployed. The same survey found that returnees largely belonged to the educated category and preferred white collar jobs, which unfortunately were not available enough in the local labor market. So, if a mass migration has to happen this time, this is the same reality that migrants would be returning to. And every expenditure that was fueled by remittances will suffer. Loan repayments, real estate, school fees, none of it will flow as it used to. All of this is to say, Kerala needs to diversify its economy. Experts list ecotourism, renewable energy, and innovation ecosystems as possibilities, especially to keep its younger population within the state. But to make it happen, it will first need to stop relying on the remittance buffer. And perhaps this crisis is a wake up call for a new direction.